How's it going, YouTube? Copnet speaking. I hope you guys are well. Well, this is going to be upon a topic which is indeed very tragic. This topic is related to one of my favorite literatures, internet literatures, which is known as CreepyPasta. There's also CreepyPasta Junior, CreepsMcPasta, Shadow Lovely, etc. But this is basically dealing with CreepyPasta and CreepyPasta Wiki in itself, as they are the main foundation literatures. What this the situation is that I'm sorry, I'm gonna lost for words. Creepypasta is like a set and series of horror stories which is meant to entertain children and adults. Basically, the ages of people who read it range from maybe 13 and above. We also have people in their 30s, 40s, even older reading them. I even knew someone who was 50 who read them, etc. What I'm trying to talk about is that these stories are very popular on the internet and they get thousands and thousands of views and thumbs ups as well. Parodies have been made about them and spin-offs have been made about them, and fan fiction art has also been made off of them. Creepypasta has been translated into several different languages. They even also have their own franchise. But the sad part of it is that two people happen to take the stories of creepypasta rather too far, in resulting in the maiming of one of their own friends. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you might remember reading about in Waukesha there was a situation of two 12-year-old girls stabbing their friend over 19 times. This occurred when these two girls, by the names of Anissa E. Wire and Morgan E. Geyser, when they invited their friend over for a slumber party, and then, at the slumber party, they stabbed their friend over 19 times. The motive, according to their minds, was that they believed that the character Slender Man, on seeing their sacrifice or their murder of this young girl, would accept them into his mansion and would allow them to live with him. They would become his proxies or his servants. It seems very delusional, and which it is. There has been a lot of media talk and a lot of fingers pointing in the direction of Creepypasta and his associates and his stories and narratives, feeling that Creepypasta Wiki is to blame for these two girls wanting to harm this other young lady. Basically, it's kind of like the Columbine situation where the media blame Marilyn Manson for the school shootings. My opinion? My feelings? In my personal feelings, we really have to take a broad look about it and look at it in perspective. Let's look at, say, these stories are generally violent because generally violence is what gets people to actually listen and hear. If stories were peaceful and have everything going right, nobody would really want to listen. But if stories have pain and suffering and obstacles, that is something that draws the person in. Let us look at, say, Shakespeare's tragedies. Look at Romeo and Juliet, which had a lot of gore, a lot of sword fighting, and ultimately suicide from both Romeo and Juliet at the end, resulting in the mourning of the Montagues and the Capulets. That had violence in it. But at the same time, I don't hear the media saying that children killing themselves or teenagers killing themselves over lost love and yet blaming Shakespeare for it. I don't hear them saying that. Or if we look at Harry Potter, he had to go into a lot of confrontations with his enemies, including one, Lord Voldemort. They had to use wands, of course, because they are magical. But it resulted in Lord Voldemort's death, but I don't hear the media saying that children shooting each other is the reason due to Harry Potter. And of course, the Hunger Games, when we see children fighting one another with crossbows and arrows and knives and daggers, we don't see people blaming kids going after one another with knives because of the Hunger Games. Or even video games such as, say, the Walking Dead game, where we see the characters fighting against the zombies or even fighting against each other in the name of survival. but yet we don't see people blaming them for that. But in this case of creepypasta, this internet horror literature, we see creepypasta getting blamed. Why is that? To this sense, I cannot really say. But into the sense of the girls, I feel that these two 12-year-olds, as all 12-year-olds are, were extremely underdeveloped in their sense of understanding what is right and wrong, what is real and what isn't real, and could not see beyond their actions and their consequences. Most children of that age cannot think beyond what they can understand. But most 12-year-olds do not want to harm anyone to such an extent. Sure, we see 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds pulling each other's hair or punching each other, but it's rare that they go beyond that. But there are several who are the exception of the rule. If we look at Mary Flora Bell, when she was 10 years old, she murdered several people, including a baby. And she laughed about it, too. There are plenty of documentaries regarding Mary Flora Bell. And if we look further into her life, we would see that her mother was horribly abusive to her. Her mother was a prostitute, for one thing. But the thing is that mother would prostitute the child and make the child engage with sexual acts with other people for money. Mary Flora Bell's mother would also humiliate and chastise the girl if she did something wrong. Mary Flora Bell had bedwetting issues because of the stress, of course, and to punish her for that, her mother would take the mattress or the sheets stained with urine and put it outside the house for everyone to see, as in her mind thinking that it would be a good punishment to prevent Mary from ever wetting the bed again. And you and I both know that is not a way how to deal with a child's bedwetting. It's not. So in my mind, I would have to assume that both these 12-year-olds, Anissa and Morgan, must have been going through a very similar situation in their life. Further information isn't being explained about how their childhood is or how their family life is, but all we can do is guess. And all we can do is look at other situations of people being in similar situations and look at their past life, their past experience, and just sort of assume that it might have happened to them. What I'd like to know is that where were the parents? Really? Where on earth were the parents? Now, granted, I know there are some places where kids can go on their own, but there are many places on the internet where they cannot. And it is the parents' responsibility to have the computer in a public, in an open public part of the room where everybody can access it to and everybody can basically see what's going on. That's why most experts recommend that to not let kids have computers in their own room, but to have a computer in a family room where everyone can see. Because when kids are alone with such electronics, you only can guess what they can do by themselves. Where on earth were the parents? Where was the internet block? Why weren't they looking at what the children were reading? I'm not saying that they should stop them from reading creepypasta at all, but there are certain creepypasta stories which are suitable for children who are comparatively younger. And if these children were exhibiting signs of aggression or signs of disturbance or signs of extreme withdrawal, did not the parents notice it? Did not the relatives notice it? Did not the teachers in their school notice it? I mean, of course, the other children might have noticed, but of course, what could they do? If they try to complain, they might get scolded, they might get reprimanded, or you know how arrogant parents are. They might as well dismiss it and not have it responded, because every parent believes their child is the best. This type of their ego comes in the way. Didn't any elder who was around these two kids even notice? My question is, where were the parents? Where were the elders? Where was the older brother, older sister, the aunt, the uncle, the grandmother, the grandfather, the teacher? Where were they? Now on to the part of creepypasta. Is it to blame? Is it not to blame? I feel it would be very double standard if you did blame it. It would be very double standard if you did blame it because of creepypasta having acts of violence. As I've mentioned before, lots of stories in the past had violence. Lots of situations in the past had violence. I hear Maury Povich talk about that video games or cartoons are the cause of why people are acting so crazy. What about the wars that happened way, way back in the past? What about the Industrial Revolution when children were forced to crawl on their hands and knees? What about in India, Mahabharata, when the gods and goddesses were fighting against each other? What video games did they play? What about when, according to the Christians, when Jesus Christ was crucified? What type of television show did the Romans watch in order to get influenced by that? I mean, it can go on and on and on. It isn't, and the thing is, when we look at the cross, for example, not to insult any Christians, but when we look at the cross, wait, just put that aside. If some people, critics, look at CreepyPasta and say, "Oh my God, look at the pictures, they're so violent. Look at Jeff the Killer, he's so violent. Look at Slender Man, he's so violent. Look at the Rake, look how they act, look how they appear." These same people who consider themselves to be very conservative, look at the crucifix, for example, that many people have on their walls. A structure of a man nailed, half naked, nailed to a piece of wood with nails in his hands and nails in his feet and the wound at his side. That's violence. That's a violent act. It isn't necessary to show it. There was no place in the Bible where it said that you have to show it, but you guys, but the media and the culture tends to show it anyway. That's a violent act. Yet you don't say that seeing a man getting nails in his hands or nails in his feet is the cause of why kids are doing what they're doing now or why adults are doing what they're doing now. Nobody says, "Oh, the only reason why she behaved that way is because she saw a man with nails in his hands," according to a book. You don't say that, but you're going to blame a couple of internet stories for that? It's like when Marilyn Manson was singing several of his rock songs, and like I've mentioned before, in the Columbine, people blamed him for that. On the day when Columbine took place, the president of that particular time dropped the bomb on Kosovo. That's not violent? Nobody called him violent. Yet they called Manson violent because he sang a few songs. I mean, what is all this double standard? Then there are other violent things in the world, or seemingly appearing to be violent, and yet no one is blaming that source. Why are we playing just a couple of internet folklore? This isn't the first time we've had stories or information that seems rather scary and rather intimidating, and it won't be the last. I mean, we've had these, when people often wonder what is the purpose of even these stories, look back in the past when we didn't have television, when we didn't have records, when we didn't have any sort of thing, but we had folk stories. People would sit around the campfire or sit on rocking chairs and tell stories to each other in order to pass the time, in order to amuse themselves and amuse others, which is the same thing. But the only difference is it's on the internet. It's good that they have things like that because it broadens a person's creativity and it encourages them to actually write. Maybe not necessarily with pen and paper, but it will certainly get them to type and get them to think. I know such stories got me to think and write, not about things that are violent, but it did encourage me to write. It did encourage me to write. You have to know the difference between fantasy and reality. You have to know the difference. These kids obviously weren't mentally competent and they couldn't understand. But plenty of others are. I am. You can't blame CreepyPasta Wiki for that. I mean, it's like, remember the movie The Lion King? Lion King Part 1, when Scar threw Mufasa off the mountain and Simba was watching from a distance? Are we going to say that if two brothers fight each other and one of them dies, that it was the fault of the Lion King that they saw Scar throw Mufasa off the mountain? Are we really going to say that? We're not. Or if someone poisons another person and they die, are we going to say that's it's the fault of the movie Snow White because the witch gave her a poison apple and she ate it and she, died somewhat? We're not going to say that, are we? No. We would say, but those are just children's cartoons. That was just the plot of the story. That was just a plot line. People are smart enough not to take that seriously. Well, people are also smart enough not to take creepypasta seriously in that sense either. Adult parents, please, please, please watch your children. And not only in the sense of the internet or TV, but watch them generally. See how they act, see how they dress, see how they eat or what they don't eat. Ask them how their day was when they came home from school. I know kids just tend to walk and say, yeah, it's fine, and then that's it. But really, try and get to talk to them, because there are probably a lot of things that they don't want to tell you. Maybe due to shame, maybe due to humiliation, maybe due to the fact that they want you to think that they're brave and tough. Maybe they're afraid of retaliation from the other group. But parents, please, please try to get to know your kids a little bit more. I know you have busy life, but these are your kids. And these two girls are most likely going to end up in jail for the rest of their life because of their own stupid actions. I feel sorry for their parents. I feel sorry for the victim. I feel sorry for the victim's parents. And in some sense, I feel sorry to an extent. I feel sorry for those two girls because there must have been something going on in their mind. They must have been going through something in order to do that. They must have felt some sort of loneliness. They must have felt some sort of rejection. They must have been longing for acceptance in some way. So they decided to unconsciously make up the idea that Slender Man exists and that he lives in a mansion and that he would accept them. You can obviously tell how popular these two girls were in their real life. You cannot blame stories and media such as this for the actions of people. People need to have the proper understanding of what is real and what is not, and what is good and what is not. And if you notice that your child is acting irrationally or gets confused, you shouldn't be letting them have access on the internet. Or you shouldn't let them have access to the internet without proper supervision, because you don't know what they could do. Children like that need help. They need guidance. They need counseling. They need a doctor, a counselor, a preacher, something, depending upon your religion, culture, and what you believe in, what you go by. They need help. Parents, please listen to your children. Forget about creepypasta for a few seconds and listen to them. If they have a problem and if they're like, Mom, and you're like, oh, not now, honey, blah, 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 blah. Mom, no, not now, not now. Blah, blah, blah. Stop it. Put the phone down. It can wait. Because you never know what your children, and then your children just walks away, and that's it. They probably wanted to tell you something important, and then you didn't leave it. And then you didn't let them. I remember a time in my life, and this is not to insult my mother, I love my mother. I remember a time in my life when I was in like the first grade, I think, and our teacher was so rude and racist. She was rude to all the other kids, but only nice to the two particular kids of a particular race, which she happens to be, and I'm not going to say what color she was. That would be rude. She would put us in the corner just because we got an answer wrong. She would yell at us. She would snap at us. She would take our snacks away. She wouldn't let us play on the playground. It wasn't that we were irresponsible or rude kids. It's just that we were too fucking scared. And when I went to my mom and said, Mom, the teacher was really angry at me. Because you know how kids are at that age. We can't actually vocalize properly into what we want to say. We just say whatever we can. Instead, my mom says, oh, teachers just get like that, Rashmi. Don't mind it. Teachers are like that. Teachers only want the best for you. And the proper response should have been, oh, really? She was angry? What happened? Please tell me. Like that. Do not blow. And eventually a few days later, she did go to the principal, and then she did find out, and then that teacher was reprimanded. So thankfully, she did do something. She did eventually do something. But the point is, don't do that. Do not blow them off that way. If they have a problem, don't just say, be a man, be a woman, take it. Listen to them. These kids might have had something important to say to their parents. Their parents might have just blown them off unintentionally or intentionally. Don't do that. Listen to your kids. Listen to what your kids have to say. Because if somebody had listened to these two girls, I'm pretty sure that this situation would not have happened. I'm pretty sure if they had read The Hunger Games, I'm pretty sure if they had read, Goosebumps, or watched the Devil's Reject, House of a Thousand Corpse movies, Scream, Insidious, Ju-on the Grudge, or any other horror movie, I'm pretty sure they would have reacted in the same way because those movies are chucked with a lot of with violence and violence and violence. The only difference is that creepypasta has more, how you say, a refined, more proper way of speaking, a more educated way of speaking. You can tell by the leader of creepypasta is very educated in how he talks. And by the way, Slender Man is not the leader of a cult. He don't even exist. It's like saying Santa Claus is the leader of the North Pole. He doesn't exist. It's just fiction. Listen to what your kids say. You may be saving their life.